I'm Meredith Adler, the Executive Director of Student Energy Global.
What do you see as the main trends, the main forces that are currently reshaping the Canadian energy and electricity sector, especially in terms of workforce needs?
There are a few forces, but I think the big one is a major call for electrification in Canada and an increased demand for basically electricity as a product. I think when the climate strikes were happening many moons ago, it feels like, there were moments where I was meeting with people from the electricity sector talking about how, we were having climate elections. People were winning elections based on youth votes and youth votes for climate. We are seeing those calls for essentially electrification, for decarbonization through the Fridays for Our Future movement and through other youth movements that are happening. And that the electricity sector needs to be really prepared to both attract this talent, not to leave the political will for their sector on the table, but also to train this talent. I think the energy system is really complex, and we need people who are able to grapple with this complexity and think about community-based solutions. And young people are really well positioned to do that. And so I think those are the really big challenges ahead of the electricity workforce sector, is both harnessing that talent, harnessing that interest and that momentum, but also looking towards making a more inclusive sector where we're really training people for the challenges that we need them to address.
How do you gauge the level of interest among Canadian students and youth in general in the electricity sector, and what kind of opportunities from your vantage point are available for them in the sector?
I actually think that the electricity sector has a lot of work to do to brand itself, to harness the talent that is coming out of interest in both the energy sector and in climate movements more broadly. People aren't making the connection as they should be between an interest in having a meaningful career that acts on climate and the need to work more in the energy sector. And then once they make that shift, there's a huge amount of opportunities in the energy sector and in the electricity sector for young people. Anything from working in the trades, starting your own business, or going to work for any of these larger utilities. There's a ton of work to be done, and there's a limited amount of time to do it. But it is really about helping people to make that connection between the sector that exists today and really what we need it to be for the future of Canada.
You mentioned branding, and you also mentioned making that connection between the current state of the electricity sector and what it can be. Can you expand a little bit on that and what you think the electricity sector really needs to do to be more attractive to the youth? And perhaps also within the electricity sector, who has to take the lead on that initiative?
I think that first and foremost, the electricity sector needs to see itself as Canada's leading vehicle for climate solutions. I think that we need to be really ambitious about expanding our grid, about increasing our transmission capabilities, all kinds of different things that will really allow for the sector to lead on decarbonization. And I think that in terms of recruiting young people to the sector, it really is on companies to think deeply about what it is that they're offering and how it's going to look for young people going forward. And a big challenge in the sector is that right now, especially those in leadership, are predominantly white, predominantly male, and thinking of it really as, a risk management sector where we are mitigating risk. And I think while mitigating risk is really important for the electricity sector, it's a key function. We all really depend on electricity. It's more than that. And I think having more ambition at the top and making sure that that permeates through a company is important. The other thing is really going after the fact that a lot of the challenges Canada's facing with equity, with diversity, with the calls that young people are making for environmental justice, for Indigenous rights, a lot of these tie back to our energy system. And I think that is heavily overlooked, the role that the electricity sector can play in starting to solve these challenges. And often people are thinking about equity and diversity in terms of who's on your board or what's the, identification of your CEO. But actually, a lot of companies are leaving behind the low-hanging fruit of how do we grow up the next generation of people in the electricity sector to be different than we are today? How do we empower young people who didn't ever see themselves in the sector in the past to make their careers happen in the sector now and into the future?
What are some of the barriers for entry for students and youth looking at the electricity sector as they would, at other potential sectors to break into, and how do you think those barriers, as you see them, can be broken?
A huge barrier is that the career path is not as straight as some would like it to be. For some of the trades, there are apprentice programs, there are different things happening. But for being an energy analyst or taking on different roles within the corporate side, often when you're talking to executives of these companies, they had some strange, circuitous path that led them to their role, or they started out as an engineer and then pivoted into business development. And ultimately, the problem with this is that, while these fun career paths have been fun for those who have them, they take a certain level of power and privilege to get to. And when you don't have a set path, when you can't say, if you're taking this university degree or getting into this college program, that's going to help you get into this sector, that's a real barrier, because we're not able to communicate what the success will look like for young people if they choose to go down the path of pursuing a career in the sector. So there are some people within Canada, specifically I'm thinking of a group called Colleges for Resilient Recovery, that are really trying to tackle this skills gap, because we're talking a lot about the investment we need to decarbonize Canada. But what we're not talking about is there's a massive skills gap that we need to fill in order to decarbonize Canada. And it needs to be that we're finding more inclusive ways to train people. So Student Energy is working a lot on that. We have a Leaders Fellowship program that's all about getting your first project off the ground. We work to support the 7 Gen Council, which is a group of Indigenous youth working to entice other Indigenous youth to get into the energy sector. And we're just about to launch their very first project-based program called the Indigenous Youth Mentorship Program. So there's a lot of things that are going on, but the problem is that we need to do them faster and they need to be more efficient, and it really needs to be more accessible to young people. It can't just be a few different master's programs that get you into the electricity sector. It has to be something that's accessible at our colleges and other institutions all across Canada. Young people are often seen as an adversarial force when it comes to energy and climate. They're out there, they're in the streets protesting, but actually I think that framing is a real misbranding of what they have to offer. Young people really are looking for avenues to be part of solutions, and everyone, all three, industry, academia, government, have a role to play in helping to create those pathways.
What programs or supports or incentives are available today to help to prepare our youth for employment, and ideally even for leadership positions in the energy sector, and in particular along the energy transition? And are there things that you think are missing, supports or other programs that you would like to see?
There are a lot of different programs that are available. So for Student Energy, just ourselves, we do a lot of online energy education, helping people to understand the energy system. We have a fellowship program that's a 10-month course all about really getting your first project off the ground and helping people to build that robust leadership skill set. And we're even launching a new course around becoming an energy analyst, developing that core energy skill set around modeling, policy analysis that's really challenging to get in universities and is often very expensive otherwise. But beyond just what we're doing, there are some fantastic programs. There's the Green Jobs program that's being hosted through Natural Resources Canada, and that Electricity HR is helping to facilitate. And that has been a massive one for our organization and others to really start to be able to dive in, hire young people, and have the time and the capacity to train them. And I think, there are other trainings going on there. A big missing piece in some work that's going on is there are a lot of research gaps around what are calls for action around the future of energy and the skills that are needed to fill in what the disconnect is there. I think what we're seeing is that by and large, a lot of traditional university-based training programs really aren't hitting the mark in terms of what it is that you need, especially when it comes to systems thinking, when it comes to how do you put together all the little components that ultimately make up these bigger energy decisions and make them in a really effective way. That's where things are really lacking, and that's often what you're hearing when you're talking to the full energy sector. And so for us, a lot of that has looked at project-based learning, but ultimately what we need to do is be getting really more resources into the hands of young people and helping them to see how they can take on their first projects, their first community projects, and help grow those to build that skill set, because it is a very hands-on thing. You can't just learn systems thinking by reading a book about it. You really need to be digging in, trying to install a solar panel, running into problems with the electrician, getting into your regulations, all of those, going to see your city council. All of these things are really important skills. And the only way to learn it is by doing it. So that's a big gap that we're seeing. And a lot of people are working on it, but the funding needs to channel in the right direction. And we need to really be thinking critically about our education system and how are we effectively filling these gaps. I think politicians in Canada really need to wake up to the force that young people can be for the shifting energy sector. Often what you're seeing is trying to rally young people for elections and then ultimately not really listening to or providing programs that really work for them in the long run. And what you're doing is really leaving political will on the table. Often you're hearing people talk about thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs, but then when it comes to a 22-year-old graduating university, those jobs are nowhere to be found. And it's because the clean tech sector is small, so they're not recruiting, they're not, doing these big job fairs. There's a lot of challenges, and ultimately it was traditionally the fossil fuel industry that went into high schools, that went into universities, that asked people to study petroleum engineering, asked people to get into their industry. And now that same effort needs to be happening to ask young Canadians to get into the industry and to be part of the solution and actually provide for them to be able to do that.
If you had 30 seconds to pitch someone in a position of power in Canada to improve and to strengthen Canada's, future energy workforce, what would you choose to pitch and to who in 30 seconds?
I would pitch electricity company CEOs and say that you really have a huge leadership opportunity to transform this country, and you need to lean in and talk to your regulators, talk to the provinces, talk to the cities, and figure this out, because ultimately leading on electrification is how we lead Canada. And furthermore, you really need to lean into what young people are asking for, rather than being scared of young people or asking them to temper their expectations or slow down. Lean in, work with them, and build up a new workforce that looks different than the one that we have today, but that will achieve so much more for Canada.